Hello everyone, this is Winter here with Sonic Academy, and welcome back to the next video in this series. In this video, we're going to be starting the sound design and production of this downtempo electronic track, and I want to make something that's a bit more downtempo, a bit slower sounding, that's also kind of dark and ambient, but also has some more melodic and uplifting elements as well. So we're going to start off by creating a chord and arpeggio sound that's going to provide the melodic backing for our song, the ambience, and will also provide some interesting texture that will sit behind the entire track. So the first thing that we'll do is set our BPM to 180 beats per minute. And we'll actually be programming everything in halftime, so essentially it's the same as programming it all in 90 beats per minute. But this is the BPM of the original project that I created so we'll just be programming everything in 180. But if you'd like, you could also just program everything in halftime at 90 as well. It's basically the same thing. So to create this sound, we'll be using the VST, the Korg Monopoly, which is a VST emulation of an analog piece of hardware, the Korg Monopoly synthesizer, which is a classic vintage piece of gear. And this is a plugin that I use all the time, and eventually I'm going to pick up an actual hardware version of the Monopoly. But for now, I just use the VST. And it's actually a really fantastic VST as well. It's only, last time I checked, it was only $25, and it's a really great classic style emulation of the original hardware. And it's really great for creating analog style synth sounds, especially analog style polyphonic chords and pads and everything like that. The cool part about it as well is because it's modeling analog hardware, the harder you overdrive everything. So the higher these levels are, so if you overdrive this input level here and the master output level here, you'll get a little bit more crunch and analog flavor to the overall sounds, so it can sound super nice. So even just this default patch sounds really, really nice and also gives you a really cool analog feel. So to start off the production on this patch, let's go ahead and initialize everything. So we'll just click on this drop-down menu here, and we'll go over to the initialize program and just select the default. And this will actually be a pretty simple patch, so you could recreate this on another synthesizer if you'd like, but we'll be using this one because it has a nice analog sound. So let's go ahead and take that transpose down to about 12. So it's moving everything down one octave. Let's put the level of the first saw oscillator all the way up to 100%, and then we'll turn off the other saw waveforms. So now we only have one saw waveform, playing back whenever we press our key, and then we're going to go ahead and bring this filter cutoff down slightly, the resonance up a little bit, to about 3.0 or so, or just around there. And we're going to make sure the output is set to 100%. The output volume from the amp envelope on the synthesizer. We're going to make sure it's set to polyphonic mode so you can play chords. And then we're going to move into the voices tab, set that to a maximum amount of 25, and set the unison voices up to 2. So now it sounds like this. Whereas before it sounded like this. So it widens everything up a bit, and then we'll also put the spread all the way up. So that just makes everything sound nice and wide. The final control that we'll do is put the analog amount, this analog drift, up just a little bit to about 2.5. And this will add some subtle pitch drift that you would have on the actual hardware unit. So if I increase this all the way, you can hear that effect is a little bit more apparent. So the individual voices sound like they're slightly detuned. So it just adds a little bit more variation and also makes everything sound a little bit more like an analog synth. Let's make sure that master volume's all the way up, and then we can go ahead and close out the VST. And because this is a pretty simple patch, you could also use analog oscillators on a synthesizer like Serum or Massive, but I just decided to use this one because I really love the sound of it. So the next thing that I want to do is add a little bit of analog crunch and distortion to the sound. So let's go ahead and load in an instance of the Soft Tube Saturation knob, which is an awesome free plugin. If you don't already have this plugin, it comes in all the major formats, VST, RTAS, AU, and even in rack extension format. It's also free as well, so if you like it, great, or if you download it and you're not really a fan of it, you can always delete it, at no harm to you, so it's always a good plugin to have. So let's crank up that analog saturation amount just a little bit to about 4.6. And let's turn this to keep high mode so that it distorts these sub bass frequencies before it distorts our high frequencies. And without it. So it really fattens up that sound. It adds a little bit of crunch. And just to hear what this keep high is doing, let me just crank this up all the way. So this is with the keep high turned on. So you can hear it lets a lot more of those high frequencies through. So that's why I will leave that on. And then the next thing that I want to do is, because we'll be adding in a sub bass a little bit later, I want to cut out all of the low sub frequencies. So let's go back over to Ableton Live's audio effects. Let's go over to the EQ8 and just drag and drop that in. And then we're going to cut out all of those subharmonics. So let's go ahead and click on this low shelf. Let's change that over to a high pass filter. Let's put the amount at 187. So it cuts out all of those low sub frequencies. So other than just cutting out this low subharmonic, it doesn't really have any audible effect on our synth sound, which is what we want. Because we'll be playing chords and arpeggios a bit later, whenever we start layering up all those different subharmonics, it makes our mix down sound a little bit messier. So what we want to do is to remove out all those subharmonics and add them back in later with another synthesizer, and that way we can have a little bit more control over our mix down and also make everything sound a bit cleaner. So to just make our life, whenever we're mixing everything down, quite a bit easier. The next thing that we'll do is add in a reverb, and you could use any reverb that you like for this, but I'm going to be using the FabFilter Pro R, which is the reverb from FabFilter. So let's just go ahead and load that up. So let's look for FabFilter, and then we'll go down to the Pro R. And then the default patch is actually pretty good. But we'll be making a few quick adjustments, so we'll make sure that this reverb is a little brighter. We'll take the character and put that more towards chorus, so it gives us kind of a more chorusy reverb sound. We'll leave the distance where it's at, and then we'll bring the space down slightly to about 2 seconds or so. So it gives us a little bit shorter of a reverb. Make sure this is as wide as it can possibly go, so bring the stereo width all the way up. And then we'll put that amount at about 60 or so. So it kind of washes out our whole signal. And then the final thing that we'll do on this effects chain is add in a utility plugin. And what we'll be using this for a bit later is to create a sidechain effect. This is just a carryover from how I like to do everything inside of Reason, which is my main digital audio workstation, is I want a really, really tight sidechain curve. I don't want kind of the slower attack times and slower release times you usually have by using sidechain with an actual compressor. And that's why I like to individually draw in the automation curves for each of my sidechain signals, and then that way I can have a bit more control and have a bit tighter of a sidechain signal. You can also achieve this with audio plugins like LFO Tool or any sort of envelope modulation plugin, but this is just a free way of creating the same effect, so that's what we'll be using today. So let's go ahead and go over to the audio effects, and we'll go ahead and grab the utility plugin. And then we'll just drag and drop that on. And then let's right click on that and create a new automation lane. So now with our completed synth patch finished, let's go ahead and add some chords into our sequencer. So let's just double click here. And then let's go ahead and make this whole section the pattern length. It's at 4 bars right now. Let's take the pattern length and move that up to 32 bars. And then we'll also go ahead and just drag that out in the sequencer as well, just so we have our full section here. And then let's first start by drawing in some chords. So let's go down to our second octave, I guess the first octave here, and we'll enter in a G note. This will be the first note in our whole section. And I'll go ahead and turn on that audition button as well. And we'll just extend this out so it lasts for 8 full bars. And then we'll go up to the next G. So it's G in the second octave. And we'll drag that out. So we just have some simple octave chords going on. And then we'll go ahead and move up 7 semitones to the D in the third octave. So that sounds like this so far. So you can really hear that distortion effect that we've added, the soft tube saturation knob. And it gives you this really nice analog crunch that sounds really cool whenever it's applied to those classic waveforms. So the last note that we'll add to this chord is one more, and we're actually going to add a B note in the third octave. And it adds a really nice epic feel to the overall chord. Where this would be without it. So it makes the whole part feel a little bit more epic and a little bit more melodically interesting. And I believe this may be a fourth up from the original root note. Let's see. So you're combining octaves and also sevenths as well. But then you add this fourth in there, and it gives it this really nice epic feel. And I actually found this note through trial and error. I don't know tons of music theory. I kind of base everything off feel. And that's what I did here is I was just experimenting, trying to figure out what note I wanted to add in on top of this chord. And whenever I played this note, it created the most melodically interesting pattern, gave it this really nice epic sound. So that's why I decided to go with. So now let's go ahead and copy over these chords real quick. So I'll turn off the automate. I'll turn off the audition while I do this so we don't have to keep listening to that. So let's go ahead and copy that over. And then I'm going to move this up an octave. So 12 semitones. And then we'll go ahead and copy this over one more time. So all the way over at bar 25. And then we'll put this back over here and move that down 12 semitones. So we have the same chord as the first section. And then in this last chord, let's go ahead and remove this D and this B in the fourth octave. And this will help add a little bit more of musical closure to everything. So we have it starting on this B note, raising up in pitch, dropping back down in pitch, and then dropping even lower in pitch. So our second chord sounds like this. So it just adds a little bit more musical interest and variation so that things don't get stale. So now that we have those chords out of the way, let's go ahead and add a sweeping arpeggio on top of this section. So let's go over to our first chord and zoom all the way in. So we're just looking at the first bar. So this is just the first bar here. And we'll go ahead and move up just a little bit. And then we'll start off on this D note, this D4. And then let's go ahead and move up 2 semitones. So we have it raising up in pitch. And we'll kind of create this arcing melodic pattern. So we'll just keep following that scale. So let's copy over that next note and find the next note, which should be 2 more semitones up. So it sounds like this so far. And we'll just keep following up that scale. And then we're at that D note, so it sounds like this so far. So it's raising up in pitch. Now let's have it drop down in pitch. And actually, let's extend everything out so that they're playing for 4 16th notes. So now everything sounds like this. And then we're going to go ahead and start another melodic pattern that's also arcing and raising in pitch. But we'll go ahead and start that a little bit lower down. We'll go to this A note. And then we'll move up the scale. And I'm just doing this by ear as well. I believe this may be a G minor scale. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm just doing this all by ear and moving up the scale. So we're at this E note right now. Now we're going to move up to the G, which is the root note for this specific track. And then let's go ahead and move down. So let's start on this E. Let's go down to the D note. And then we'll drop down to that B. So I find whenever I'm writing and composing arpeggios that it's best to work in these arcing patterns that move up and down, and to try not to jump around too much. Gives you a bit more of these epic flowing sounds, as opposed to something that's a bit more jarring. So if you want a kind of a background arpeggio, I suggest doing something in these kind of arcing patterns. At least that's what I find tends to work well. So now that we have that whole section finished, let's go ahead and copy it over. I'll turn off my addition, and we'll just copy that over several different times so that it extends out for this first whole chord. And then we'll go ahead and drag this up so that it's 1 octave up, so it matches what's going on melodically with the chords. So it's the exact same arpeggio pattern, just shifted up an octave. And we'll copy that over one more time. And then let's go ahead and copy this over for this next section. But we'll drop it down an octave so that it reflects what the chords are doing. Then to add some additional interest, let's double time this arpeggio pattern. So with just the arpeggio selected, let's go over to this button and then hit these multiply buttons. So this button will double the amount of time this arpeggio is. So that adds a little bit more interest. And then let's copy that over one more time so that it extends out for that whole section. And make sure to put it at the end here. And we'll copy it over one more time. So far this whole pattern is just repeating itself. And then for the last chord, let's go ahead and take this arpeggio pattern from the first section and copy it over onto these last chords. This will help conclude things musically. Instead of jumping back up to this higher pitch, which would kind of raise the tension, it'll help things kind of reduce musically, which will end up bringing a little bit more closure to our musical pattern. So let me go ahead and copy this over. And we'll just copy and paste that instead of dragging it over with Option. And then so far, our whole musical sequence sounds like this. So you could really hear with that last section that it gives a nice conclusion to the whole pattern, rather than jumping up to these two higher notes like we had in the previous chord. It jumps back down to just these octaves, which helps musically conclude that whole pattern. So now with that out of the way, let's go ahead and add in some simple automation. So what we'll be doing is automating the filter curve of the synthesizer sound. So let's go ahead and click on the patch here. We'll click on this arrow to show the configuration settings for the automation. Press configure, go over to the cutoff. Sometimes I kind of have to double click it several different times for it to pop up. And then we have the option to automate this. So we'll right click on that, click show a new sequencer lane, and then we'll zoom in to just the first chord here. So this first 8 bars, and then we'll add in a automation lane or automation curve. So let's go for the first 2 bars, leave that open, and then we'll add in an automation point, add in one at the end, and then one in the middle here, which we'll drag, and put that about halfway down or so. probably to an amount of about 30 or 33. So now it's just moving the cutoff point down. So I'll go ahead and open up the Chord monopoly so you can see what's going on here. So pay attention to this filter curve. And that's going down quite a bit, so let's go ahead, push that up slightly. There we go, that's a little bit better. So now let's copy and paste that automation over. So we'll copy and paste that to the next section. And then for this part with the fast arpeggios, that sounds like this. Because this is acting in double time, let's double the automation's timing. So let's go after the first 2 bars, insert a point, and then move 2 bars over, start another point, and move that down to just about the same amount. And actually, let's go ahead and double that time here so that we'll have it go twice. So we'll have that start just about at bar 19 here. That's where it starts going down. And then put that in amount of about 52. There we go. So we'll copy and paste that over. And then we'll copy and paste that over again for the last section. So now it's sort of dipping down twice, which adds a little bit more variation because in the previous section, the automation was a bit slower. The final thing that we want to do is add in a fake sidechain curve with the utility plugin by automating the gain. And this just lets us have a really nice and tight sidechain curve, which is what we want. So let's go ahead and zoom into this first section. Let's create 2 automation points. So we'll drag and do something like this. And we'll just copy and paste that several times to check and make sure that our timing is correct. So right now it's acting a little bit too fast. So I'm going to delete that automation curve and we'll just do half time here. That'll work good. We can always go back and change it later as well. So let's just copy and paste that over several different times. And you don't necessarily have to do things this way. This is just how I like to automate so that I get more control over my individual automation curves. So for example, if I wanted to add another point here and to kind of bow out this automation curve to make a little bit more space for an individual sound, I could. So it just gives you a little bit more control. And it just depends on how you want to do things. All right, and to save time, we'll just copy all those over and paste them. So now with the fake sidechain effect, the automation and distortion and all the effects, our instrument device so far sounds like this. So that's all for this video on the chords and arpeggio sounds for this downtempo track. Join me in the next video where we'll be adding in a sub to go along with this pad. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next video.
Thanks everybody for watching, commenting, and indeed liking. We really do appreciate all the support we get here on our Sonic Academy YouTube channel. So if you found this video super useful, please, we'd love you to hit the subscribe button. We update the YouTube channel every week with new content. And if you want to watch some more relevant content, just click on the videos beside me.